After having several lectures on Python, we now turn to SQL or SQL as some people call it. SQL is a very powerful programming language and it can be used on a standalone basis or combined, for example, with Python, R, Java and other programming languages. Before moving to details of SQL, we need to know what is Relational Database Management System. It's a system or infrastructure which allows you to make queries and manage your databases. Top RDBMS are Microsoft SQL Server, MySQL, Oracle Database, and PostgreSQL. These database management systems use the dialects of SQL, which is the slightly different versions of SQL. For example, Microsoft SQL Server uses top keyword to get, for example, the first n number of rows, while MySQL uses the limit keyword. Along this video, we will use Microsoft SQL Server and Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio to make queries. To create a database, we write create database and the database name. Here our database name is RSenseDB. We can see in the Object Explorer after refreshing that we have RSenseDB in the databases section. Now let's move on to create tables. To point to database management system that we're going to create table inside RSenseDB, we write use RSenseDB. Then we type create table and table's name. After that, we write the column names for the table and data types. We can also specify that data inside this column should be not null, and it should be, for example, primary key if you want inside this column to be unique values. Pay attention to data type. Here is tiny int for integer values. We can also have small int, and big int. And for example, tiny int allows from 0 to 255 values, while int and big int allow bigger values. But bigger values mean also larger space in the database. So pay attention to choosing the data type that is suitable to you. Here we have also a variable character type for customer name column. It allows us up to 50 characters inside this column. We can also have char data type, which allows precisely the number of characters you write after it. Let's create another table which is called loans. So we type the column name, customer ID, and then again tiny int data type, and we specify it not to be null. Then we type the loan balance column name and the money data type. It would be useful if you play with the data types to get the differences more correctly. So you see inside the database in Object Explorer, our two tables we have created. Let's insert some data into the tables we have created. Again, we point to use RSenseDB in database management system. So to insert data, we type insert into table's name, and in brackets we specify the column names and then we after values keyword, we type in brackets the values we want to insert in exactly the same order that we specified after accounts word. That is, first customer ID, then opening date, then customer name, then industry, and so on. And pay attention to data types. So we run the code and we have values inserted in our table. Frequently, it is useful to insert multiple rows at the same time, called so-called bulk insert. It is especially useful when you use, for example, in Python, you use loops to populate the database, and you can, with one step, insert up to 1000 rows in the database. So we just copy the values and change them. You see, you can insert each row separately here, provided that each row is in separate brackets and with its separate values. And all the row data are separated by comma, except for the last row. Here we modify the row values so as they are different. Please pay attention that dates here are in a string format, that is inside single quotes. Now let's modify the industry column, and we have here three unique values: retail trade, wholesale trade, and mining. We have completely finished coding for this part, and let's run the code. Later we will view our inserted results using select command. Now let's see the case. Let's also update our loans table. So we again type the order of the columns we want to insert values. So we type insert into loans and the order of columns, then values, and then for bulk insert we specify the customer ID and loan balance for several clients. Pay attention that we can have repeating numbers, integers in customer ID column. So we execute this code to get data inserted into loans table. Now let's update. We have inserted values into our accounts and loans tables, and now let's update one of its columns, one of the columns in loans table. So we type update table name, which is loans, set the column name we want to modify. Here we want the loans balance to be 550,000 for customer ID of 1. About where keyword we'll talk later. Now let's view our results. To view the values we have inserted, we type select asterisk and from table name. Here we type select asterisk from accounts, which returns all the values in this column. We can also type select and column names. For example, customer name and account balance from accounts. After executing the code, you see only these two columns. We can make calculations with the columns we have got with this command. For example, we can create a column called accounts balance in euro by multiplying accounts balance by 1.19, and you see here the result. The same result can be obtained by declaring variables or creating variables in SQL. For that purpose, you write declare keyword and write at and the variable name, which is x-rate here, and the type. We want the x-rate to be decimal. And on the next line, you set the value of 2, and you can use x-rate you see here to multiply account balance with the x-rate value of 2, and you have the result in accounts balance in euro column. We can also order the table by some columns. For example, we here have ordered by customer name using order by keyword. We can order by another column called industry. You see the industry ordered by ascending. Now we want it to be descending, on descending order. You type the des keyword. If you want to filter the data from column, for example, you want SQL to return table results with account balance greater than 500,000. You use the where keyword and then the condition. You can also specify multiple conditions by and or keyword. A very useful feature is the grouping by feature, which can be performed by group by keyword. But in this case, you should specify the column to be summarized. So we want the SQL to return industry column and to summarize the account balance column using sum function, and to return it as account balance. So the name of the column should be account balance. You see the result, which is summarized by industry, and the column name is account balance. You can also use other mathematical functions such as average, minimum, maximum, count, and others. Pay attention here that you can use where keyword before grouping by. So here we have done wrong because we have written where after from accounts. If you want to filter table result before grouping, you can use where keyword. If you wish to filter result after grouping by, you can use having keyword. So Here we want our average of group by results to be greater than average of accounts balance to be greater than 700,000. You see, we have got only the result that satisfies the condition. So remember, where keyword before grouping by, having keyword after grouping by. Now let's test the like keyword. If you want to search in customer name, for example, gym keyword, you use like keyword, and in quotes you specify the gym keyword surrounded by %signs. %signs tell the program to search gym anywhere in the program. If you omit in the beginning at the beginning the %sign, the program will understand to search values beginning with gym. We can use in keyword and in brackets specifying the values to filter the results by the values we want. So you see here we want mining and retail trade to be in the industry. Let's see our table, original table again. If we want to filter top, for example, 3 rows, we use top keyword. Let's use the case when expression. Here we want the SQL to create a separate column which will be the value of which will be conditioned on the account balance column values. If the account balance is larger than 500,000, then the new column value will be large, otherwise it will be small. So we use case when then expression, and we write case when account balance is greater 500,000, then the new column will have a large value, otherwise small. And end as we specify the column name, which is type A. We can also join or merge the data of the 2 or more related tables. If we want, for example, to join accounts table with loans table, we should have a relation of these 2 tables with each other. Both of these tables have customer ID column. If we want to use left join, then all the customer IDs of the accounts or first table will be kept, and only will be returned those customer IDs from the second table which have match with the first table. So you see Here we want to left join accounts with loans. If we execute this statement, we'll get the merged result, and pay attention that for those customer IDs that do not have entry in loans table, null is returned. We can also try to right join. In this case, only those IDs on the loans table will be returned, and only matches from the accounts table with loans table will be shown. Let's try pivot function of the SQL programming language. So first of all, let's group by results, and also afterwards contrast it with the pivot function result. Here we group by industry, and you see it has returned table with industry and account balance columns. If you're familiar with Excel pivot function or pivot tables, this is the similar context. So we just write pivot, and inside the parentheses or brackets, we just specify the column which will be summarized. This is the account balance column, and we want it to return sum for industries in mining. Pay attention to square brackets, retail trade and wholesale trade. Later we will name pivot table as pivot underline table, and we'll get the entries in industry column as column names. Pay attention to the result of the pivot table we'll get. So executing the code, you see we have got all industry column values as separate column names, and entries are the sum of account balance. Let's try if-else statement. Again, we're using RSenseDB. We are declaring or creating a large variable with a money data type, and we are making large variable to be equal to row count of the accounts table where account balance is greater than 500,000. Now we'll try the if-else statement. We want if a large variable equals to 0, we want SQL to print no large accounts. There is another option, else if large is greater than 1, we want it to print more than one large account. And for all the other options, which is we have only an option left that large variable may equal to 1. We want it to print only one large account. Let's run the code. You see it has printed more than one large accounts. Let's handle errors and create transactions in SQL. Again, we are using RSenseDB. We're making all the operations in RSenseDB. Here we want to create a transaction of a basic transfer from one client's account to another client account. For this purpose, we declare several variables. We want to have a variable of sender ID, which has a data type of tiny int, receiver ID, which also has a data type of tiny int, the amount to be transferred, which is a money data type. For example, we are the sender ID or the sender client is the client under number 1, and receiver client, the client who will receive the funds, is the client under number 5. They are transferring to each other 5,000 from, for example, USD. So to error handle this transaction, we have written 2 lines of code. The first one is we have opened try statement, and we have began the transaction. Transaction is the logical collection of several statements of code which are treated as a single whole. That is, we want either all the lines of code to be executed successfully or none of them should be executed. Here we want to have the sender balance, to get the sender balance from the accounts table for the sender ID of 1. Then we are going to subtract, as we are going to transfer the amount from the sender to receiver. First, we are going to subtract from sender account the amount he transfers, and then add that transferable amount to the receiver account. Here we update accounts table, setting the accounts balance plus equal the amount to be transferred for sender ID, no, minus equal the amount for the sender's ID, and plus equal the same line of code for receiver's ID. Effectively, we are taking amount from sender account and putting the amount from receiver account on receiver account. But first of all, we want to check if there is no sufficient funds, or there are no sufficient funds in the sender's account. We reject the transaction. So we effectively want, here we have checked if the sender balance is greater than the amount, we commit transaction, or we make transaction occur. Otherwise, we want the transaction to roll back. That is, no change will be done to both of accounts. This is the first block, and we want also to print that not sufficient funds in the account if the amount to be transferred is greater than sender balance. Next, we want to close the try block, which handles the errors, and then begin the catch block. If there is an error inside the try block, then the execution is transferred to catch block. So we want, if there are errors in the try block, we want the transaction to be rolled back. That is, no change should be done to both of accounts, and also it should be printed that there was an error in the program. We should end the catch block here. Let's run the code to get the result. You see the receiver is customer number 5 and the sender is customer number 1. If we transfer amount of 5,000 from first customer to fifth customer, you see the balance for customer 1 has decreased by 5,000, and the balance for customer 5 has increased by 5,000. Let's try 30,000 to transfer 30,000. Running the code, we will get, you see, customer 1's account has decreased from 240,000 to 210,000. Let's try 300,000. Here, customer 1's account has no sufficient funds. Let's see if the program will handle it correctly. You see, no change has occurred as there are no sufficient funds in client 1 account. You can also comment the SQL code just by typing 2 minus signs and then commenting, putting your comment on the line you want. Here we have commented return message if there is no sufficient funds. Let's turn to stored procedures. To create a stored procedure, we type create procedure. For example, the name is get client account, and effectively the stored procedure is a function which takes input arguments and returns the SQL statement you want. Here we want it to take the customer ID and then select from accounts table those customers data which have a customer ID equal to what we will supply to stored procedure. Running the code will create the procedure. Now let's move on to execute. Here we also use the RSenseDB, and we can write exec and stored procedure name, and also after space the input variable which is 1 here. We want it to return the first client's data. We can also type customer ID equals to 1 or equals to 5. Here is the, you see, we have typed customer ID equals 5 and it has returned only customer data for 5th client. We can, instead of exec, also write execute. It often happens that you have long lines of SQL code which you do not want to write it every time you use. So you can create a view which every time you call the view, it will execute the SQL code you have supplied when creating a view. For example, we want to create a view get large loans, and which will select loans or where a loan balance is greater than 400,000. Instead of every time writing all these SQL statements, select statement, we can create a view and execute view just like any SQL table. Use RSenseDB and select everything from the view we have created, get large loans view. Let's see the result. It has taken or filtered all the loan balances greater than 400,000. In the end, let's try to delete the data and tables. To delete data, we just type delete from table name and the criteria we want to delete. Here we want to delete the customer number 8. See, running the code and then selecting all the table, we'll see that number 8 customer does not exist. To delete all the data in the table, we write truncate table and the table name. Here the accounts table. You see, if we would run, we have only empty column names. If you want to delete table, not the data, but also the table created, we type drop table and table name. If we want to select the accounts table, it does not exist because we have deleted it.